Hello, I'm Jan Szrewiński. Welcome on board the Eastern Express, and as always, I hope you enjoy the journey ahead. Our main story in this episode concerns Georgia. It's a country where the wine is old, the history is older, and the government is currently having a very bad week. Just last night, the United States Congress passed what can only be described as a diplomatic nuclear bomb wrapped in red, white, and blue paper. It is a bill that doesn't just call out Georgia's ruling party, the Georgian Dream, but completely obliterates the dream part. Here's what's in it. Georgian Dream has officially been labeled pro-Kremlin. Aid? Frozen. Sanctions? Incoming. And the legitimacy of the ruling party? Absolutely eviscerated. So without further ado, let's bring you up to speed on this story.
The protests in Georgia show no signs of abating. Almost 160 days since their beginning, the demonstrators have spilled from Tbilisi city centre to its eastern suburbs. In a large demonstration dubbed the March of Unity, they demand the government's resignation and the freeing of all detained civilians. Despite the police crackdown on the peaceful gatherings, the protesters themselves continue to display courage. They believe in a Georgia that is part of the Western community, even if their own government, seemingly influenced by the Kremlin, does not.
What Russia has been doing in Georgia is really the testing of a new hybrid strategy. Russia has been involved in Georgian elections very heavily with propaganda, but also with techniques that have helped the ruling party to manipulate the elections.
Ever since it declared a victory in the 2024 parliamentary elections, the result of which continues to be contested amid allegations of vote rigging, the Georgian Dream has been driving the country away from its Western partners. Despite public outcry and outrage, despite the European Union's condemnation, the government seems hell-bent on introducing one authoritarian measure after another. Many fear that moves such as stripping MPs of their seats and detaining peaceful protesters are only the beginning.
And now we're zoning in on the East-splaining portion of our show. As with many authoritarian-leaning parties, there often comes a time when a light reshuffle must take place. The Georgian Dream is no different, as it has decided to elect a new chairman to replace former Prime Minister Irakli Garibashvili. Here is what this means for the country and the upcoming local elections.
Garibashvili recently announced that he is stepping down and leaving Georgian politics. The former prime minister had resigned from his position prior to the controversial 2024 elections and became the Georgian Dream's chairman. Though being the party's chairman isn't as powerful of a position as in some other countries. The party's secretive founder, billionaire Bidzina Ivanishvili, most likely remains as the party's true power. But a change of leadership, even if only a figurehead one, always has wider implications. In this case, it seems that the Georgian Dream wants to shake things up ahead of the crucial local elections. These are a chance for citizens to choose who runs their districts and cities, and are the largest vote of their kind. The question remains whether these elections will be fair, as the opposition expects the Georgian Dream to rig them. Should it be a fair vote, however, it would be a heavy blow to the party's designs for the country.
And now, as always, it's time to take a look at the issue in greater detail. So, let's begin. After years of hedging, doublespeak, and pretending to be Europe's chill cousin who just doesn't like NATO that much, Georgian Dream is now recognized by the US Congress as a regime actively undermining Georgia's democracy, helping Moscow, and, to use the technical diplomatic term, acting like a complete jackass. Now, you might be wondering, how did we get here? Well, Georgian Dream has been playing a dangerous game, straddling the fence between East and West, all while waving a pro-European flag in one hand and stuffing Kremlin-friendly laws into their pockets. Think of it like someone saying, "I love human rights," while throwing reporters into jail and launching tear gas at peaceful protesters, which they literally did, repeatedly. What finally broke the camel's back were a series of moves so authoritarian, so blatantly repressive that even Georgia's most patient Western allies threw up their hands and said, "Okay, we're done pretending, you're just confused." This new law, passed by the US Congress, is not just symbolic. It's got teeth, you see. We're talking global Magnitsky-style sanctions, the kind that freeze assets, revoke visas, and make it a real pain to vacation in Tuscany. Within 60 days, the US will begin targeting key figures in Bidzina Ivanishvili's inner circle. The billionaire oligarch basically owns Georgian Dream like it's his personal theme park. if you've been cracking down on activists, rigging elections, or just generally acting like a cartoon villain, congratulations, you're on the list. And perhaps most significantly, all US security aid to Georgia is gone, suspended, dead. That is, unless the government can prove it's committed to democracy, rule of law and free elections. This is huge because for years, Georgia's government has relied on its Western-friendly branding to secure aid and legitimacy. Their favorite slogan has been, "We are pro-European," even as they were pushing Russian-style anti-NGO laws and physically assaulting journalists. So, what happens next? Well, that's up to Georgian Dream, really. They can either double down and push Georgia further into the Kremlin's orbit, or they can step aside and let actual Democrats take the wheel. Think I can guess which one they are more likely to choose. The days of pretending to be a pro-Western government while running a pro-Russian operation are over. So, Georgian Dream, pick a side. And here's a hint. One of them just froze your assets and called you unfit to govern. Make of that what you will. And now, here to shed more light on this story is our guest today, Alexander Krivou-Asatiani, Director for Foreign Affairs at the United National Movement, Georgia. Hello and welcome to TVP World.
Thank you. Thank you for covering this. It's indeed a very important day for the national resistance movement in Georgia.
It is important, but it is also really interesting because it's all in the details, isn't it? Let's talk about the so-called Megabari Act. Now, first, let's think about the name for a moment. This is an acronym, but also is a word in the Georgian language. Can you tell us more about it?
Megabari means friend, and that's why this bill is so important, because what this bill represents is an act of friendship towards the Georgian people, an act of extending a hand from our Western friends, from our democratic partners from Europe and the United States, towards the Georgian people, towards all of those that have been fighting for democracy and for freedom for now 7 months. This bill is not seen in Georgia, and I can speak on behalf of a majority of the Georgian people when I say this. This bill isn't seen as an act of aggression, as something hostile towards Georgia. It's seen as something hostile towards those who don't want Georgia to be an independent, sovereign European nation. If someone sees this bill as a hostile bill, it is because they are afraid of what democracy can mean. That is why the bill is framed in a language that it doesn't necessarily impose sanctions under any condition or under any circumstance whatsoever. It imposes those sanctions and those travel bans and etc. in the event that the Ivanishvili regime refuses to restore democracy. So that is why we see this as an act of friendship, and we're extremely grateful because, Congress has not passed a lot of laws since the 119th Congress began. Only a handful of laws have been passed in the full House of Congress, and the fact that Georgia is the Megabari Act, the Friend Act, is one of them, means that Georgia is on top of the working agendas in Washington, D.C.
So it is a pretty decisive step, right? As you said, there were not too many bills passed that are exactly like it, and which also make a very clear distinction there. Like the Georgian Dream government has a choice. It either is on the side of democracy, on the side of the United States and its allies, or it is likely to fall into the lap of countries like Iran, China, and Russia, and they are all mentioned pretty much from the get-go, right? As countries that we, the democratic world, do not want to give control of Georgia to. Would you say that this perhaps represents a major policy adjustment? Because we had some ambiguous statements on countries like Russia before, but right now it sounds much more traditional, hyper-focused on the objective of keeping Georgia within the democratic sphere.
Yeah, I mean, as someone who has been involved in direct negotiations between the Georgian democratic political forces and our Western partners for already a few years, I can tell you that indeed it was more often than not frustrating to deal with so many Western partners, whether it was in Brussels, whether it was in Washington D.C., at the European Commission, or in the U.S. with the State Department or USAID, with people who were telling us that we were being radicals or we were exaggerating, and that in reality, the Ivanishvili regime would at some point democratize itself after the elections, et cetera, et cetera. And we kept warning people, warning our friends, warning our partners that this is a dangerous regime that is working hand in hand with the same collaborators of authoritarianism that you see in Iran, that you see in North Korea, in Venezuela, Nicaragua, Cuba, back then in Syria, and of course China and Russia being the puppet masters in the back. For some reason, they didn't believe us. So it's obviously a very strong breath of fresh air when now what we're saying, is not just our conspiracy theory, but rather it is something that is recognized by the United States House of Representatives. But also, I want to make it clear that we understand that this is a bill that's passed so far only in the House. It still needs to be approved by the Senate. It still needs to be voted on by the president. And there still needs to be so much more that needs to be done if we really want to impact what's going on in Georgia. Because Bidzina eventually has been prepared for all of this. He's prepared. He's prepared for the long game, and there's concrete things we can do, and there's concrete things that the international community can do, and they need to be courageous enough to do it.
So do you think that this particular moment, like the passing of the Megabari Act, at least, as you said, through the House of Representatives, is going to perhaps be the wind in the sails of the opposition and for the protesters? I mean, it's been about 160 days, right? And the protests are continuing. Do you think that this is going to give new momentum to these demonstrations?
Right. So I think it's more the other way around. I think we need to understand that one of the biggest achievements of the protests, and a lot of people, when protests go on for that long, a lot of people get frustrated because we don't see the regime changing. We don't see any less arrests of political prisoners. We only see worse and worse situations. So a lot of people might think, what's the point of the protests? And I'll tell you that this is the point of the protests. Without the protests, there would be no international momentum. The traditional Western, whether it's European diplomat or something else, they are very prone to the situation, to accommodating to the situation on the ground, even if that situation on the ground is something unacceptable for Europe. They would rather make deals. They would rather, just ignore the problems on the ground if they can just do business properly. So the fact that these protests are happening is the reason why so many in America and in Europe have simply not given up and not followed, previous talking points on what's happening. So I wouldn't say that the bill will create more momentum. I will say that the protest is what's creating the momentum for bills like the Megabari Act. And for us, this is a question. It's not, we're not looking at the protest as, if we protest more, maybe something more will happen from the international community. We look at this as a question of life and death for our nation at this point, because if we just give up, then we're talking about a very long line of history that is just going down the drain. So we have to fight till the end. The question is how much the international community will listen to us.
And now, another related question is, how much of a bite does the Megabari Act have? Because we've had some strong statements by the proponents of the bill during the discussion, right? We had, in fact, one of the Republicans in the House of Representatives calling the Georgian Dream government a mafia cabal. Strong words, really. But what about the specific sanctions? Will they be enough to make the Georgian Dream government perhaps reconsider their path? Is it still possible to step away from that path?
Well, that is a good question, because I think the answer here is both yes and maybe. And to to start with a yes, I think it's clear that having sanctions imposed by the United States government is something that can really do a lot of damage to the reputation of even an individual member of the government, of the so-called government. Someone might question twice before agreeing to a job in the regime. Someone might want to resign while it's still time, and I think we're seeing that, and that's definitely something that's something that is absolutely important, and we're grateful for that. However, we shouldn't think that this bill is the only thing that can bring down the regime, and I think that while the Megabari Act is something that is absolutely incredible because it puts Georgia in the spotlight, it puts Georgia on top of the working agenda, I think a lot more needs to happen on the other side of the Atlantic, from the side of Brussels, from the side of London. Most of Bidzina Ivanishvili, the oligarch, the Russian oligarch behind the crisis in Georgia, most of his money is still stashed away safely in British overseas accounts. We're talking about Virgin Islands. We're talking about his family members still walking freely in the streets of London. And this is very worrisome. We're talking about the mayor of Tbilisi, one of the most corrupt men in Georgia, having countless apartments in Paris. We're talking about Bidzina Ivanishvili himself having a French citizenship and being awarded the Legion of Honor by President Macron not too long ago. And those are problematic. So at least one thing we know for sure is that the Megabari Act, that Congressman Joe Wilson, who has been such an incredible friend of Georgia, and really, if someone deserves the term Megabari, it should be him. People like him know what needs to be done, and people like him are the ones that need to be listened to. And I hope that the other side of the Atlantic, not just the United States, but the other side, follows the leadership of the United States in what's happening.
So one quick question. Do you think the only option is the collapse or resignation of the regime? Or could some politicians in the US be thinking about driving a wedge, specifically exploiting one particular issue? Okay, the government might be pro-Russian in general, but also it is not actually maintaining diplomatic relations with Russia because Russia is illegally occupying parts of Georgia. And the government has still not said it's okay. In fact, they said it's not okay. Do you think it's exploitable in any way to change the direction of this government?
Yeah, I mean, I think, I think it's pretty impossible at this point because either Bidzina Ivanishvili, and I'll be frank, I think either Bidzina Ivanishvili is willingly conspiring against the Georgian nation, or he's under the fear that if he gives up his guard, his overlords in Russia will punish him, and he doesn't want to deal with that. I think it's too late for the Ivanishvili regime after 11 years or 12 or 13 years in power already. I think it's too late for them to change course. It's a course that they've been adopting since day one, and they've only been solidifying, and to just turn back, even if something magical were to happen, it's too late now. They've already ruined the partnership with way too many people. They've been attacking, using very disrespectful language every single European friend of Georgia, countries, governments, and individual politicians, and that's just not something you come back from. But regardless, even if what you're saying about Russia is true, and let's be honest, the diplomatic thing is just Russia doesn't really care about that. What it cares about is its economic colonial power control of the country, and it controls economically Georgia entirely. I think what's really important to understand is that Georgia is also a colonial outpost of China, and that is not something that the United States or Europe wants. And so, I definitely think it's too late for the Ivanishvili regime.
So they are too far gone, and now they are being called out for it by the United States. Alexandre Cravo-Asatiani was our guest today here on TVP World. Thank you very much for joining us and for sharing your insight.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And now we're moving on to the Eastern News Flash, a series of all the other stories from the East that you really don't want to miss. Russia's grand wish of having an interference-free Victory Day celebration seems to be just that, a wish. Moscow's mobile internet providers have reported widespread disruptions and have warned of possible outages.
The entire country has been put on a state of alert as Russian authorities are organizing celebrations to commemorate the Soviet Union's victory over Nazi Germany on May 9th. This anniversary has often been used by Kremlin propaganda to draw comparisons with the ongoing war in Ukraine. Russia's emergency system alert has even sent out warnings concerning restrictions on mobile internet usage during the day itself and the week preceding it. That's not all, however, as out of fears of some kind of interference, Russian authorities have decided to cancel the planned parades in Sevastopol, the largest city in occupied Crimea. This cancellation comes in the wake of a reported Ukrainian drone strike from the sea, which hit a Russian fighter near one of the country's Black Sea ports.
As Moscow is concerning itself with how to run this year's Victory Day anniversary, another problem has sprung up on its plate. Ukraine has reportedly launched a new offensive into the Kursk region.
Russia recently declared that it had fully, quote, liberated the Kursk region from Ukrainian forces. Ukrainian authorities denied these claims, saying that the reports of Ukrainian troops being surrounded or destroyed were Russian propaganda. Now, however, several Russian sources say that Ukraine is not quite done with its plans to hold parts of the region and attempted to breach the border near the town of Tyotkino. The Shot Telegram channel says that around 250 Ukrainian servicemen and 15 heavy equipment units took part in the assault. The Ukrainian force has reportedly been stopped by Russian artillery fire and drone strikes. Ukraine first breached the border with the Kursk region in August 2024 in a surprise attack that landed them swaths of the area. The offensive forced the Russians to scramble and even need to use the aid of North Korean troops, whose number mounted to between 10 to 20,000.
When it comes to the war in Ukraine, it is no secret that Russia has been making progress, but at a very high cost and at a very slow rate. So slow, in fact, that Forbes says it would take the Russians more than 200 years to conquer all of Ukraine.
In April 2025, Russian forces were able to capture 175 square kilometers of land in Ukraine. What did this cost them? A mere 36,000 casualties. A report by Forbes points out that in turn Ukrainian losses in the last month were minimal. If one carries over the current rate of the Russian invasion and the casualties that Moscow is suffering, the outlook doesn't look that good for them. At this rate, Russia will conquer Ukraine in 2022-56, and having suffered 101 million casualties. In comparison, Russia's entire population in 2025 is around 140 million. Of course, Russia's goal most likely isn't to annex all of Ukraine by holding every single inch of land. Nonetheless, this shows how not only painfully slow Russia's progress is, but also how unsustainable and simply horrific this process is.
And for this episode of Eastern Express, it's the end of the line. Please stay with us here on TVP World for more latest news and updates.